Hello. Hello. Hi there, Stephen. Can you hear me?
Hello, I can now. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Your camera looks a lot clearer than mine. Might just be the quality of my laptop. But thank you for joining us, Stephen.
That's all right, no problem at all. You're on my tablet, so you're getting lucky with the webcam, to be honest with you.
Oh, nice. Okay, we'll take advantage while we can, while everything's nice and clear. If you just give me 15 more seconds, I'm just sharing it on our Instagram too, so people can tune in there. And then I will put it on our Twitter audio spaces and we'll be good to go. How are you today, Stephen? A lot of campaigning today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, honestly the thing that I guess will make sense once I say it is that the thing that is hardest about election campaigns is it's not so much the campaigning, it's fitting in everything else in your life that you're trying to make sure you're not putting on hold too much. Um, at some point you need to, you still need to go to Tesco, you still need to get some food in the
Yeah,
house.
good point. Good point. Things we don't quite consider the normal
Mm.
lives, how much they get changed through these kind of periods. And was it a sh bit of a shock announcement for yourself as well? Did it spring up on you, or were you expecting this the announcement from Sunak?
um, it's one of those things where it's both a shock and not a shock, right? Like
Yeah.
it had to happen sometime. It was very difficult to know when. The rumors in political world were that it was a little way off, that it was going to be autumn was the sort of the rumors. But I think just dropped something. I always think that if you have spent any time in politics and you still believe the political rumors in politics world, then something has gone wrong with your time in politics because you should know better than to trust the rumors.
Okay. And just while I'm putting us live on Twitter, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Stephen Richmond. I am the Liberal Democrat running in the Coventry South constituency. Um, Coventry is an interesting place for the Liberal Democrats because I think it showcases where we can be sort of meaningfully useful in terms of holding places that are sort of very much held by one political party to account, being a different voice, offering a different perspective. And that's, I think, a good understanding of why I've had the political life I've had. I'm from Coventry. I grew up here. Um, as a small child, I was in a village just outside Coventry, but I moved to Coventry proper for secondary school, and I did briefly live in London for 5 years for my sins, for which I apologise. But I've since moved back, and I think that Coventry kind of snuck up on me as a kid. You spend a lot of time as someone who lives in Coventry with lots and lots of people ragging on it and lots of people being mean about Coventry. It's a very common thing I think to experience if you've grown up here. And when I moved back after I'd lived in London, it reminded me of that. Yeah, there are things about Coventry that are wrong or unfair. We've often been neglected. We've often been left behind on investment and funding or whatever. But it is a special place, and being the city of peace and reconciliation and being the city that invented the idea of cities twinning with other cities, and being the first city to ever do that, I do think that speaks to a spirit of inclusion and a belief in people that, you know, I appreciate it's all a little bit highfalutin, but I do find that inspiring and I do care about that. But yeah, apologies for being a little bit poetic rather than grounded there.
No,
But
no, no. It's good. It's good to get a real insight into the character of a potential representative. And as somebody born and raised in London with a lot of family and friends in Coventry, I do understand those sentiments too. Very last question before we get on to hashtag the Sikh vote questions. Just tell us about why you are with the Liberal Democrats, what you think they bring to the table.
so the reason I have stuck with the Lib Dems all these years, and sometimes I felt closer to the party, and sometimes I felt further away from it. But it's really two things. It's one is that it's that thing I was talking about holding, Coventry being this great example of being able to hold Labour or the Conservatives to account, because I think that the sort of the scary example is in the United States, right, where they have those two parties, and everyone needs to be stuck on one of two hymn sheets, and there are more, yeah, there are just more hymn sheets than that in the world. And I think that brings us on to the second thing, which is that like the underlying value that is sat within liberalism, sometimes worse, sometimes better. And I like to imagine that over the decades we've got better and better at this. That liberalism started with the idea of expanding the vote to the working classes. That was how the Liberal Party in the UK got its first start. And I think each successive generation of liberals has realized that needs to expand more, right? And understanding that each and every human being is important, and that public policy, government policy, needs to start from the understanding that every single person is important, is the core liberal idea. And I by no means think that my political movement has always succeeded in that. But the thing that I've always believed very deeply is what matters is being one step better each time. And that's the kind of legacy that I want to be part of. That's why I'm still in the Lib Dems.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll get on to the questions about hashtag the Sikh vote, because just for anyone listening in that hasn't heard about this series before, this is something we've been doing since 2015. There are many communal issues that the Sikh community that matter to the Sikh community across the board, and these are the questions. These are the types of topics we will raise to you through the following questions. So the first one is about hate crimes. Now, you can probably hear my baby son screaming in the background. Apologies for that, but he likes a political debate too. Um, yeah, so first question about hate crime. Um, Anti-Sikh hate crime is still a major issue in the UK. We had a very serious incident in the north of England just in the last month or so.
Mm-hmm.
My question to you then, Stephen, is how can the Liberal Democrats help with this issue, especially considering the ambiguity, I'm struggling to say that word for some reason, ambiguity of how to classify it. And what I mean by that is that it is not Islamophobia, but often can happen because of mistaken Islamophobia. But at the same time, as we have seen with recent incidents, even white Sikhs, they also are targeted with this kind of bigotry. So again, how can Lib Dem help the Sikh community tackle the hate crime issue it suffers with?
So my view firstly on that last point on the classification. I think the relevant thing, what should be relevant under the law, and I'm very, very happy to push for any clarification that needs to be put into the law to make this clearer and to make sure that people act on it correctly, is that what matters is the hate part, not whether turning around and saying, "Oh, well, sure, I hate Muslims, but I thought he was a Muslim, so I've just made a mistake, Your Honor. It's an innocent mistake." Like that's an absurd defense. Like what matters is the hate part, And so if there are cases where what is happening is the law is getting confused because it isn't written quite correctly, then I think that's something that absolutely the Liberal Democrats can and should
Yeah,
be
so
working
just
on.
to clarify again with that, so the Sikh Federation UK, they have said there are issues with tracking with tracking problems like anti-Sikh hate crime because of this classification issue, which is why we raised this point. Sorry, do continue.
Right. So in terms of data and tracking, now I do think this is very important. There's a really interesting example that's sort of similar to this in terms of the French example. So the French decided that it would be more egalitarian to not include a whole bunch of data like that when you're collecting statistics about people, on the idea that, well, then we're treating everyone equally. But the trouble was that, as you sort of pointing out in this case, they then couldn't track when specific groups were being treated differently and being treated worse. So my view on that is that the simple answer is the best answer, which is that if the hate crime is hitting the target that it is intended, then yes, that goes in the Sikh column. If it's someone who is perpetrating a crime because they are intending hatred towards Muslims, but they've just got confused, then I think you record it not as in both columns, because then it'll get double counted, but you just recognize that in the data. And I think that the simple answer to that is just to set up not that specific example, but to set it up as a general rule. If someone is committing a hate crime, but has incorrectly identified the target, that can happen in a whole bunch of cases. I've weirdly had anti-Semitism directed at me before. I'm not Jewish, but I occasionally have people who've decided that I look Jewish. That happens. Just recording that it is a case of mistaken identification, I think is fine. You just put that in the data alongside, and then that way you can pull it out afterwards. And any group that wants to look at it, like yours, that wants to get the correct statistics, you would be able to just select on the file itself, I want this column, and I want to include or not include this column, and then you can accurately report based on what that data is. I think that's what we should do.
Fantastic. And just a bit more, if we could, about the hate part of this issue. How can the Lib Dems help with that? Do you think this is something exacerbated by current political rhetoric, for example?
Oh, yeah. So I absolutely think this is about exacerbated by current political rhetoric. I don't want to ignore the practical issue. Like, it is also true that policing in the UK is systemically unable to deal with crime. The courts are currently systemically unable to deal with crime, both because of funding issues. That matters as well. And I'm also very keen to make sure that we do fund those correctly. We hire enough police, and also things like the police are often doing too much of the paperwork themselves. Hiring admin assistants can be done cheaper and faster and can take some of that paperwork off the police so they can respond to things like hate crime quicker. I don't want to ignore that side of the issue too. That does matter. But I think that thing you've brought up of the climate is really the core part. I think the biggest thing that we could do, that any future government could do, would be on that social background in society. And I think the erosion of not just the importance of any specific group, but the erosion of the idea that people matter generally leads people to be more angry, more bitter, more likely to lash out at people that in their heads they've decided are different. So I think there are both a bunch of things we can do directly in terms of the rhetoric, in just terms of speaking about it differently. But I think there's also a bunch of policy things that we can do in terms of both directly with the community and outreach and those more classic policy solutions to this of trying to make sure that people who are, how to put it politely, let's say judgmental, have a chance to meet the people that they're so angry and hateful towards in a controlled and safe setting, so that they can realize, oh, these are people. These aren't these sort of terrible, whatever they're imagining. That sort of classic policy solution is important. I think Lib Dems would always support that. But what I would add that is maybe slightly a different view on it that I think we'd put in as well is that things you would think are completely unrelated, like can you easily see your GP, are actually deeply related.
Yeah.
If communities feel like the police come when you ring, if they feel like they see their GP when they need to see their GP, if they feel like they're safe on the street, or that they're not in financial difficulties, those people become much more willing to be reasonable and to see people as people. And the moment people feel that things are stretched, that things are out of control, that they can't get healthcare, they get angrier and angrier, and they find a target to lash out. And I think that part of the puzzle is as important as those first two parts that we mentioned as well.
Really important points made there. And from my personal experiences, I couldn't agree more. I will move on to the second question now. So last year, the USA and Canada confirmed issues of Indian interference in the countries, specifically for a transnational repression agenda targeting the Sikh community of both countries. Many British Sikhs believe this is an issue in the UK too. How can the Liberal Democrats help expose and tackle this issue? And just for clarification as well, I'm referring to issues such as the suspected assassination of by Avdar Singh Kanda in Birmingham last year, suspected of being poisoned. And there was also an issue with Coventry residents where the West Midlands Three were pushed towards extradition towards India by former Home Secretary Priti Patel, where they would have faced the death penalty. And after a very quick and brief short trial, it was found that there was not any evidence to support the allegations from India against them. But nevertheless, the pressure and influence from India was clear during that situation. So again, how can the Liberal Democrats help tackle and expose the issue of India's transnational repression agenda targeting British Sikhs?
So this one's a little harder for me to talk about as a sort of everyday candidate, because as a candidate in a local area, but not necessarily the party leader, obviously, I do need to be a little bit careful when talking about foreign policy or security policy. There are limits, and I think this is appropriate on what individual candidates say about that, because the last thing you want is some person in some interview like this saying something and then foreign governments having anger about it. So I'm going to be very careful in how I word this, and I'm going to be very careful in kind of the scope of what I say.
No problem.
So yeah, thank you. So the first thing is on anything involving the death penalty. I think the Liberal Democrats would be very clear that for anyone of any community, we oppose extradition if this is a death penalty involved anyway. That's a starting position. Secondly, when we're talking about these kind of security issues and foreign policy issues, I think our view would be that there are lots of things we might do behind the scenes. So a lot of this is obviously within sort of cabinet ministers and stuff, but there's also things that we can do in terms of parliamentary select committees and it is possible for those committees to work in a way on these issues where we're sort of sensitive to international diplomacy and that sort of thing. But we still get the information out. I think so. The way I would approach this mostly is that Liberal Democrats should be putting pressure and accountability behind the scenes on this, but there's very little that I would say or that I would feel comfortable as an individual candidate kind of staking out a policy position on in an interview such as this. So the way I get around that is that I think that what I need to do is I need to go back to the people in my party who are on those select committees, who do have access to the relevant people involved, and just to say, well, are you doing enough to make sure the security services are dealing with this? Have you had appropriate discussions with the Foreign Office about what we're doing on this? But I would feel a little bit uncomfortable going beyond that. And I'm sorry, I know that's not a very open answer. It's because of the issue involved.
No problem, Stephen. We do appreciate the honesty, and I think at least we are clear that extradition where the death penalty is a possibility is at least something that the Lib Dems positionally are against. That's an important point. I will say, especially particularly in Coventry, which is what I would describe as one of the most active areas when it comes to the Sikh community. This is a topic that was important to a lot of the constituents. But thank you for your honesty, and we'll move on to the next question. So, in recent years, Afghan Sikhs are among asylum seekers found entering the UK, sometimes illegally. Many Sikhs say this is because the UK government has not done enough to help provide a safe route for the community, that community and others, of course, because the Afghan Sikh community are persecuted by Islamic extremist groups, including the Taliban government in Afghanistan, of course. How can the Liberal Democrats help Afghan Sikhs get expedited entry into the UK?
So this one I can talk about a little bit more. 2 points on this. Firstly, on safe routes, the Liberal Democrats have been extremely clear on this. We desperately want more safe routes for all sorts of communities. There are a whole bunch of communities that desperately need safe routes, and we're in favour of every single one of them. So yes, in this specific case, we would be firmly in favour of the UK government taking an active approach to identifying where we need to put in support to make sure that asylum seekers can get out of danger safely and can get to the United Kingdom where that's the appropriate destination. We are very clear on safe routes, and I'm very confident that we would be as in favour of this particular safe route as any other. But I do want to speak specifically about Afghanistan because I think that it is worth taking a second to say that while this is in the past and you can't change the past, I do want to note how appalling it was that when the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan was made, which is a decision that, certainly, especially if you're talking about the Americans, they have every right to make. But to make that decision, to clearly be in a position where for years and years and years, the Taliban was unable to, take over the country, clearly it would have been perfectly achievable to say, we are going to take 6 months to find anyone who feels they will be in danger and to get them out before we allow the Taliban to take control again. And I think it is astonishing and appalling that that option seems to have not even been considered, let alone taken. It's not anything we could do about it in the past, but it is absolutely appalling. There should not be the situation where now we are so desperate for safe routes, because lots of people should have been able to get out before then. However, with where we are now, yes, we're fully supportive of safe routes. The only thing I'd say is I would go back to that point we talked about in the first answer of it's important to keep the public on side. And clearly, sometimes there are sections of the public that have decided that letting in asylum seekers is somehow some huge problem. I don't believe it is. I don't buy that. But I think that the way we address that is the things we talked about earlier in the first question. Both those kind of more direct measures, but also those indirect things like making sure that people are getting enough GP appointments, etc. I think that makes it then systemically easier to get voters on side when we want to do things like bring in safe routes. That's all I wanted to sort of add on that.
Brilliant, perfect. Thank you for that. So many within the Sikh community feel that not enough is done by major UK parties to engage with the community at a grassroots level. Mm-hmm. How can the Liberal Democrats help change this?
So I've thought about this one quite a lot recently because of a slightly different discussion that my local party was having in January. So it's interesting that this has come around. Because I feel like my party ought to be one of the best on this, in that it is so ingrained so deeply in what we believe that everyone from every community is important and matters, and that us engaging with those communities is good for everyone, including for us, that we are better when we include more people. But and I know that as political candidates, you're not supposed to acknowledge failure, but I think my party has failed miserably on this, and I think that I have failed miserably on this, and I think it's sort of for the same reason, ironically, that we believe in it so deeply. It's that when you have a wider selection of people involved in whether it's a political party like the Liberal Democrats, or it's a private company, or it's an organization, you get better decision making, you get better outcomes because you've engaged a wider group of people and they're more involved. And I think, ironically, maybe one of the reasons that we clearly so want to achieve this, but have failed so badly at it, is that what we need is the diversity. And so what I would say is two things. One, I think that it is individual political actors, candidates such as myself, MPs across the country, and candidates across the country should, just try and get in contact with local community leaders and talk to them directly. And that's something that I think I would like to do more of. But two, the thing I would say to you, and I would say to anyone who is listening from your community, is if you feel you share those values of the idea that everyone matters, and that everyone from every community is important and should have a voice, and that human beings are inherently valuable, then you have liberal values. And I think the best thing you could do is please join us. And if you do join, I think we will be better at this, because I think that your voices are going to find better solutions to this than I would find. So the thing I think I take on myself personally, and I would say again to MPs, candidates, councillors, local election candidates across the country, is that we should do more to reach out to local communities. We should do more to, as in, say, find a local community group and say, oh, hey, can I come and talk to you? Could we maybe have an afternoon together, meet for coffee or something? That's something I intend to do more of. But I do also want to stress this point that, I don't know that people like me are ever going to be truly good at this until we've sort of half solved the problem, until there are enough people who've joined to sort of say to us, oh, well, try doing it this way, or try doing it that way, or I think you'll get better engagement if you talk to people about this. And part of that is just not knowing exactly what the issues are like, which is partly why I was so excited about this interview, because I get to see what questions would you choose to ask from your point of view. And, lots of the names you've referenced, I wouldn't know about these things if you hadn't said this. And that's true of any community. You don't know what you don't know. And I think that's the biggest hurdle. So basically, I think we've not done enough in it. I think we're very bad at it. And I would like your help to be better at it, I think, is my actual position. I hope that doesn't sound too... I hope that sounds as though I am being as honest about that as I can be.
Yeah, most definitely. And actually, I'm delighted to hear such an answer, because that is the case. Just as you said, it's not happened much. Um, Often political parties are not good at this. We at the Sikh Press Association have raised this on many occasions, where MPs will come to a Gurdwara and they will pose for pictures, but they won't stay for any questions. They don't engage with the community at all. We've raised this recently where Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, did so in a way which was very dismissive of community issues, and it wasn't a great look. So we are here for that. We are definitely here to help, and you have my word. We'd be happy to help you engage with the community at a grassroots level in Coventry, and yeah, that's what we're here for. So I'm glad to hear that answer, actually. So thank you for that. Okay, next question. Something that has been prominent concern for the British Sikh community for coming to 7 years now, and actually to the global Sikh community in Canada and the USA, in countries like Holland. There have been protests for British Sikh political prisoner Jagtar Singh Johal, born and raised in Scotland. He remains imprisoned in India for now coming to 7 years, as I said. He's never been convicted for any crime. he has just been on a trial which has been continually deferred and delayed since 2017. His family say the UK government has not done enough to pursue his freedom. What could a Liberal Democrat government do to help Jagtar Singh Johal?
So I think on political prisoners, I feel very confident that we are very much in favor of pushing harder. Now, and this is exactly the sort of issue that I was talking about in the previous question, where I feel like I wouldn't know enough about this if you hadn't asked me this question. And so there's kind of two layers to that. The first one is, as I say, that yes, our view is definitely that the British government should be pushier on this across the board. The only thing that I'm not sure how to address, and I don't feel that I'm enough of an expert to say with confidence, is that compare this case, for example, to the one where in Iran there was,
Yeah,
a political prisoner.
Nazneen Zaghari Ratcliffe. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that the British government's relationship with the individual country ends up complicating different cases in different ways, right? The complication there is very different to the complication with India. And my biggest hesitation in trying to figure out a good answer to this question has been, I am not sure what sort of the expert opinion is on what the best way of getting the Indian government to do things is if you're the British government. Because I do worry, especially with Modi, that that there is always the risk of a British government making things worse if it doesn't do things the right way. So I think what I would be very keen on this is that, yes, as with all political prisoners, we would want the British government to do more. What I would want to find out is I would want to know what is the expert advice on what is most effective in terms of the British government engaging with India and how to achieve these things. And that may involve some behind closed door stuff that I can't comment on and don't know about. But I think a commitment to the idea that we should do more is very easy. The specifics get quite hard quite quickly, and I don't like answering questions. You might have noticed that I give far too long answers to every question, and that's because I don't really like giving vague answers. I like giving specific answers. I'm hesitant to give it in this case because I don't know what that expert advice would be.
Just to expand slightly on this topic, how can British Sikhs feel safe traveling to countries like India? Is there anything the Liberal Democrat government could do? Is there a position where moving forward in future, not specific to the case of Jagtar Singh Johal, but for other British Sikhs to feel safe traveling to India, where something similar won't happen to them, where they will get picked up, accused of a crime, and just based on the accusation, not based on any evidence, not charged for any crime, they can be detained. Is there anything that can be done about that from a Lib Dem perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, that is really difficult. My instinct is that part of the job of the next government will be to sit down with India and have those conversations somewhat behind the scenes and decide what it is that we can get them to commit to and then hold them to. And I think that then becomes easier. If you've negotiated behind the scenes of saying, look, we want our citizens to feel safe when they go to India. India clearly wants to be a part of the world scene. It clearly wants to engage with countries all over the world, and it does want to engage with the UK. And we are clearly important as partners in a whole bunch of ways. I think the best thing to do is sitting down behind the scenes and saying, we want that, but what we need from you on that is for British citizens to feel safe when they go to India. Otherwise, this isn't going to work. So what commitment can you publicly make, or what commitments can you publicly make that you can say, and then after that, after they've said that, I think it becomes much easier as a British government to say, well, this is just what the Indian government has already committed to. So it's fine for us to kind of push them on this. I think it's setting up the scenario such that it looks just like a normal government. We look like a normal government protecting our citizens, and that we distance ourselves from the scenario where it looks like, oh, Britain thinks it's an imperial power and it's trying to boss around India again. Setting up the scenario to make sure that that accusation is as far away as possible, and that we are as clearly as possible defending our citizens, is the work you have to do beforehand to make it successful. Because if you don't do that, it gives them an out, right? Because the moment you give them that out and they're able to use that rhetorical device, then they're in this incredibly strong position where they can get away with all sorts of things that they would never get away with otherwise, right? Because they can sort of put off the criticism. The last thing I say, this is also where working through other countries is very important. So my instinct is to partly do what I've said. I also suspect, honestly, that a lot of stuff would happen not directly via us, but I suspect that we would go to the Americans and say, look, it is intolerable for our citizens to feel in danger going to India. Someone needs to do something about this. It's for all the sort of rhetorical, historical reasons. It's very difficult for us to do as we would normally do. Can you please privately, as the US, put pressure on? My instinct is that that will be more successful. Again, I would want to hear expert advice on that, but my instinct is that that route, going indirectly, is going to work better than us trying to do it directly. I think there's a real risk of Britain setting itself up to make things worse, and I am scared about that.
That is an answer I've never heard before, and I think that will actually be an answer that will be welcomed by many within the Sikh community, because right now, as I mentioned, the USA is in the process of prosecuting what I would define as an Indian state terrorist who was part of a foiled assassination attempt on a Sikh activist last year. And Canada is in the process of prosecuting four other assassins who did carry out an assassination of a Sikh leader last year in Surrey, in a city in the Vancouver area. So I think leaning on those ongoing issues and exerting pressure, I think that many within the Sikh community might believe that would be a successful way to get the ends that are desired. So I think that is a very interesting answer, and many within the Sikh community, like I said, may welcome it. Moving on to our last few questions. In 2014, declassified documents confirmed Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government advised India on operations it conducted as part of the 1984 state-perpetrated Sikh genocide, specifically Operation Blue Star, which saw thousands of civilians killed in an attack on holy Sikh site, Siri Harmandir Sahib, sometimes referred to as the Golden Temple. Many Sikhs still want an independent inquiry into this to uncover exactly what support was given by the British government to India and why, because there's still a lot of documents that remain classified about this topic. Would the Liberal Democrats support an independent inquiry into this?
So I feel pretty confident that the Liberal view, just as a general statement, is in favour of transparency. So 9 times out of 10, I think the answer is yes. My only guess as to why there would be resistance is if there is, my suspicion is if there was a problem, what would happen is that we would say that we were in favour of it. And if it turned out there was a problem, the way it would turn up is that there would be some civil servant in the Foreign Office that said, no, we've privately agreed not to do this because we don't want to cause a diplomatic incident. That I find very difficult, because I think this is where, as a Liberal, there is a strong inclination to stand up for your principles anyway. So in that situation, my instinct, honestly, is still to go for the transparency. It's still to have the independent inquiry. What I will acknowledge is that opinions do differ on how to weight transparency versus your immediate diplomatic goals. So as an example, if doing the inquiry stopped us achieving everything we were talking about in the previous question, then I would rather achieve what we were talking about in the previous question. And so that would be where I would want to know exactly where we're at. As I say, my instinct is just to say yes, that yes, we would be in favour of an inquiry. The only reason not to do it that I can see would be if it was because that was how we were getting something like commitments from India on safety of people traveling to India, that sort of thing. That's the only situation where I can imagine being like, okay, fine. Yeah, that's where I'd sit on that, and I think that's a fair representation of the Liberal view.
Yep, very understandable. Last two questions then. Sikh advocacy for Khalistan, the Free Sikh Homeland Movement, has been demonized by UK government figures according to various Sikh organizations, including most recently Colin Bloom, government faith advisor within the Bloom Report. Many feel this is unfair and actually stems from Indian nationalist government influence. Would a Liberal Democrat government support the Sikh right to advocate for Khalistan, the Free Sikh homeland in Britain?
Okay, so there's two levels to this question. On that question you've just asked, would we support your right to advocate for it? Absolutely, yes. It is profoundly your right to advocate for that, in the same way that, you know, my grandmother was Scottish. We've seen my mom's Scottish cousin recently. He's very in favour of Scottish independence. He has every right to advocate for that. And the idea that, you know, we would suddenly say that somewhere else in the world we have the right to say to you know, British citizens living here that you don't have the right to advocate for an independent state, I think would be unreasonable. You have every right to advocate for it. I do think that the second level is whether we should say anything on it. My instinct is that we should not disparage it, but I also, for all the reasons I was talking about, you know, when Britain says something, I'm not convinced that makes it easier to get it done in India. I would be hesitant about us advocating for it because, frankly, that might make it harder for you. So my instinct is that the political class should be quiet on this. It's not our place to say, but it being not our place to say should include absolutely a commitment to the idea that you know, people should be free to advocate for it or for similar things. That's part of political freedom, and I believe that very strongly.
Okay, very last question then. Coventry has a Sikh faith school. There was an incident a few years ago where there was concern that the government was going to force the school to go under the rule of a different group that local Coventry-based Sikhs were not comfortable with. What is the Liberal Democrat policy on faith schools?
So our policy on faith schools is has been debated quite a lot in the party, and I'm not going to pretend that Liberals aren't always a little bit hesitant and nervous about faith schools, because I think we are. We're generally nervous of anything which is sort of siloing off different groups in different places. However, that hesitancy doesn't mean that we think there should be the kind of changes that you're talking about being forced through. I don't think we would support that. And our position, our actual policy position, is not much change from the status quo. Like, we think faith schools should be allowed to be faith schools, and I don't think that we would be in favour of messing about with, you know, telling local communities who has to control them. I think what we have stuck by, and I think what we would stick by, is not the group controlling, but we would insist on certain curriculum-based things, of ensuring that the curriculum in every faith school was as wide as we felt you know, it needed to be. Partly to link this all the way back to your first question, to make sure that we are doing the right things to combat hate crimes, and that any school of any kind needs to have, as part of its curriculum, things that we've done enough to make sure that they're including things from all sorts of different communities, because that knowledge and understanding of each other systemically makes people less hateful. It makes them kinder. It makes them more understanding. So I certainly don't think we would be in favour of messing about who controls. The only thing that we would say is that we do have some commitments in terms of making sure that curriculum is wide enough. But as I understand it, that's fine. That there's no change required there. I'm only highlighting that because I do want to kind of be upfront about it. But to the best of my knowledge, there is no problem with that. That's already the case.
Great. I think many will welcome the simplicity of no change required as long as things are working as they seem to be. Okay, so that concludes our discussion on hashtag the Sikh vote. We do appreciate your time, Stephen. I will say that you came across very honest, which is refreshing, I guess, for a lot of political candidates, and there were definitely a lot of positive points as well that I know I can and I will relay within the community. And just to finally add as well, within my lifetime, I'm coming to 40. I would say this is the most unique election that I've ever seen. I think we're going to see a lot of different changes. So your participation in things like this, I believe it can have a bigger impact than it might seem right now as we're just staring at each other through our laptops or tablets. So thank you again for your participation and good luck in the sense of having a good campaign and a fair campaign. Not good luck in the sense I want the Lib Dems to win. We're apolitical here, so whoever wins, may the best man win, as they say. But good luck in general for your campaign and for your own well-being. Thanks again for your time. Any final words?
Firstly, just thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here. Getting to do stuff like this is there's lots of parts of politics which are very stressful or unpleasant, and the bits where you actually get to engage with real people on real terms are actually by far the best bits. So thank you for having me. And what I would say is, I think I would encourage, if I can give an apolitical message, even if it isn't joining us or doing things with the Liberal Democrats, I would encourage people, if you can get involved in politics, even in a little bit of a small way. So much of British politics is volunteer based. So few people are paid. I mean, I know that there are some people who are paid too much, but the most people involved are not paid anything to do what they do. And being involved, if you're able, if you have the time, it contributes so much to society as a whole. And so whether it's with the Liberal Democrats, whether it's with someone else, please do consider it, because it really can make a difference. It's slow, it's too slow. I know that change is glacial. But as you say, this is a change election. This is a moment. This is a great moment to get involved. And thank you for your time.
Thanks again, Stephen. Been a pleasure talking to you. Take care and thanks for all who have tuned in. Thanks, Stephen. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.